Hello friends, welcome to another video in the Emma series. I hope these videos have been a pleasure because this is the last one. Today we will be making the accessories that Anya Taylor-Joy wears in this outfit from the new Emma movie. Some of these accessories have been purchased and some of them I have made myself. So here is a list of all the things that we need to make. These black boots, stockings for the boots, these cute little acorn earrings, Emma's yellow and gray reticule, crochet gloves, a fancy hairstyle, and of course that amazing black feathered hat. Let's begin with all the things that I have purchased. First are the boots and stockings, which I found at Walmart for $5. The stockings were $3 and they are knee-high. Next, the gloves. Now I know these are not the same as the beautiful crochet gloves that she wears, but I didn't have enough room in the budget for real ones, but these are still pretty, so I got them anyway. So that's all I bought, so let's go on to what we need to make. To do Emma's hair, I used my blonde lace wig and parted 2 front sections on both sides. Next, I put the back in a ponytail and braided a chunk of it. The braid is because the hair in my wig is so thick, I needed to condense it a bit for this updo. I pinned the braid up and rolled up the excess hair into pin curls to cover the braid. Now for the front sections. Twist and pin back each section, and once it's pinned, curl the leftover strands using a chopstick. This should give you those teeny tiny curls that Emma has. You can use a metal chopstick or you can use a wooden chopstick. I used a wooden one because that was all that I had. Or if you happen to have a really tiny curling iron, that should also work too. For the earrings, I used these acorns that I sculpted from clay, and I made sure to add a metal loop at the top so that they could be attached. But before you do, I went and painted them black and gold for more detail. And because I didn't have any more gold paint, I used gold leaf instead. Hook a jump ring through the top and use it to attach your earrings. Now I did crochet my reticule, but I'm not really a crocheter, so I didn't get a lot of footage on this, but I used a combination of alternating V-stitches and popcorn stitches to achieve this pattern. And I crocheted a square with stripes the same color corresponding to my reference. Then I sewed it up with a whip stitch and gathered the bottom and top, and make sure you leave the yarn gathering the top long so that you can use it as a drawstring for the reticule. For the tassel on the bottom, I tied together strands of all of my colors and cinched it to make the head of the tassel. Now I actually had to make 2 reticules because the first one that you saw me make in the video was way too big when I made it because the yarn I was using was really thick. The yarn was the perfect color, but it was still too thick. So what I ended up doing is I recrocheted it and I used the same amount of stitches throughout the whole thing and the same type of stitches. But instead, this time I peeled apart my yarn so I only had half the thickness that I was using, and it really did a good job at really taking down the size of that reticule.
So here's the one I just made. It's a bit large. Oops. So I made another one. This is what it's supposed to look like. It's okay, at least I got some practice, I guess.
Now for that hat. First we need to dye our ostrich feathers. I'm dyeing 5 black and 5 yellow, and in these next couple clips you'll see me dyeing blue feathers as well, but this is for a completely different project, but I thought I would show the footage anyway just because it's helpful. Pre-wash your feathers with a little soap, and then fill a pot with a little bit of water, about a 1/4 cup of vinegar, and about a 1/4 cup of your dye. You'll need more or less dye depending on your intended color. I used a lot of dye because I wanted my feathers to be really bright, especially the black dye. I used probably twice as much, if not 3 times as much black dye, because it takes a lot of dye to get these feathers to dye properly. I don't think you should add salt to the dye bath because I tried this with one of my sample feathers and it came out kind of like stringy. I think the salt kind of ate away at some of the feather, so I'd probably play it safe and stay away from salt. Add your feathers and let them sit for only a few minutes. If you leave them in for too long, they could get damaged. Rinse until the water runs clear, and now you can dry it. You can use a hair dryer, or you can toss them into an old pillowcase, sew up the end, and aggressively throw it into the dryer. If your feathers haven't reached their full fluffiness again, then re-rinse and re-dry them. And if that doesn't work, then you'll have to fluff them yourself by using your fingers to brush those little hairs in the opposite direction. When you're dyeing ostrich feathers, it can be really tricky to get them to be fluffy again, and sometimes they will never go back to their original fluffiness, but you still can get them to be pretty fluffy. I think I've had more success with the ones that were thrown into the dryer. I still had to kind of fluff them up myself, use a hair dryer, and you kind of have to spread them out a bit, but sometimes you won't have as much luck. I find the best way is to just kind of sit down and just kind of stroke the feather in the opposite direction, which will kind of agitate those little fibers or those little hairs on the feather, and it will kind of help it return to its full fluffiness. It can be kind of tedious, but it works. And if you don't find that this method is right for you, then you can also buy pre-dyed feathers online. I just find it more expensive to do it that way because if you need to buy 2 different colors, you'll still have to buy 2 different batches and it can really add up, so that's why I decided to dye my own feathers. For the hat base, I measured the crown of my head and cut out a rectangle 4 inches by that measurement. You'll also have to add a bit extra, about 2 inches, and also the seam allowance. Then I cut out a circle with that same measurement as the circumference. I should probably mention that I cut this out of my 7-ounce cotton canvas and some very stiff interfacing. Next, you're going to serge all the edges. Next, I sewed a machine felled seam when I stitched up the ends. When I finished, I ended up with an extra panel in the back because my hat was a little bit small at first. This was before I discovered I needed to add those extra 2 inches. Then I sewed the circle to my hat band. I did these same steps with some black satin fabric for the lining, and I stitched it onto my hat base. Next, I pinned some more black satin to the outside, following this pleated look on the reference. After stitching it down in place, I made the trims. I used some of this large black rickrack, and I cut 6 of them to drape across the hat in between those pleated sections. Finish the ends with fire. Now you're going to take half of those ribbons and cut notches in each of the little dips. This makes it so that the trim can be braided together. On the 3 that don't have those cuts, I glued some ribbon to imitate this stripy side of the trim.
Okay, so what I've done now is I have sewn some glass beads onto my hat, and I didn't have enough glass beads to go all the way up my trim, so I just did the parts that were going to be visible on the hat. So I just did the 3 front pieces of trim, and the rest will be covered by the feathers. Now I sewed on the trim. To the bottom edge, I added lace trim and upholstery cording. To make this feather flower thing, I cut a black felt circle and glued some black feathers to it.
Once they're glued, you're going to cut them into a circle, and if your feathers still aren't black, then paint them very deceptively. Then I glued on more white feathers and the center of a fake flower to get that flowery look. Then I attached all of my feathers. I had to only tack the top and bottom of my feathers so that they would have free movement, and also so that the thread wouldn't get tangled in the fibers of the ostrich feathers. And with that, the Emma costume is 100% completed. I am so excited for the reveal. I can't wait to see you there. If you like, you can visit the description down below where I have links to all my materials used in this project, and you will also find my links to my other social medias. You can watch another video. I have a playlist of this whole costuming series if that's of interest to you, and I cannot wait to see you in the next video. Bye!